88.1 The Burg, your music central. My name is Nathan, and welcome to What to Watch Weekends here at 9 a.m. in the morning here on 88.1 The Burg. My name is Nathan. As I said before, I run What to Watch Weekends here on The Burg, and I also run What to Watch Wednesdays here on The Burg. I'm kind of the movie guy here on 88.1 The Burg, and we're going to be talking about movies this morning. I specifically like to talk about 3 movies on Wednesdays, and then on weekends, I like to kind of mix it up and add in a couple extra. And I also usually group them based on some sort of defining characteristic of them. Usually that's what the director of the movies are, what series they belong to, what genre they are, or sometimes I just kind of throw in a random grab bag. This list this morning and on Wednesday night seems a little sort of a grab bag feel to it, except it is very much intentionally united under one specific idea, which is that they were all movies created or more so produced through the production company A24. I know a lot of people out there who tend to kind of peruse the movie scene, tend to really like A24, and I'm not going to be here dissing them at all. I do rather appreciate what they do for filmmakers. I do appreciate their dedication to allowing filmmakers to make the movies that they want to make. And we can have some very good discussions about those movies right this morning. I'm very good at words when it's 9 in the morning, so just keep that in mind. But the 4 movies we're going to be taking a look at today are Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Green Knight, The Lighthouse, and Free Fire. If any of those movies sound familiar to you, or if you want to text in a music recommendation, the number here is 509-963 2311. That's 509-963-2311. And before we jump into our first review, we are going to be listening to some Two Door Cinema Club, so stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. My name is Nathan, and welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. For our first movie this morning, we are going to be talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once from 2022. This movie came out 2 years ago, and I don't feel any older because of that. But this movie is available to watch now on Netflix at your convenience or inconvenience. It depends on what your opinion of Netflix really is, and I don't have a very good one. So let's just talk about something I do have a good opinion on, which is the movie itself, not the streaming service it's on. Everything Everywhere All at Once has gotten a lot of notoriety since it came out in the last 2 years. It's been offered many awards. It's been talked about among many online communities. Excuse the flubs, but it's very early in the morning and I'm kind of tired. So, at any rate, this movie has been talked about a lot, but one of the most prevailing sort of opinions about it is that if you're going to watch it and you've never seen it before, it's better to go in blind. It's better to not really know exactly what you're getting into, and you'll get a lot more out of the experience because of that. And I'm going to maintain that, even though it's been 2 years and a lot of people have heard about it, a lot of people possibly know how the movie already ends. I'd rather kind of keep the mystery going for that 1% chance that somebody listening has never seen it before, is planning to, and just has never gotten around to it. I know it seems kind of ridiculous to think that somebody may have been waiting an entire 2 years to watch a movie, but I mean, I've got some movies on my watch list that I've kept there for like 2+ years, and I still haven't gotten around to watching them, even though I really want to, and I tend to think about them from time to time. So it can definitely happen. And so just for the sake of that, I'm going to keep the mystery going just a little bit for the sake of you 1% listeners. The movie Everything Everywhere All at Once is basically introduced as a woman by the name of Evelyn, played by Michelle Yeoh, who is being audited by the IRS. And that's about all I can really say of the story. I don't want to give anything further away than that. That's not really anything of a spoiler. It's just like that's what they say it's about. And who am I to stop them from saying it's just about that? It's just about her being audited by the IRS. It's a very well-crafted, interesting, emotional movie, but not for the reasons that you'd think. At any rate, I did cover kind of extensively why I love this movie so much, aside from its kind of I really like that tag of you can't really know the story going in if you've never seen it before. I really like that idea of it. But aside from a lot of the other things I praised, there's not a whole mess of things to say about Everything Everywhere All at Once that hasn't already been said. But I can at least try. And one of the things that I can definitely point out, but again, no spoilers, but the movie is bizarre. It doesn't sound like it from just the explanation of the beginning part, but it does gradually get more bizarre. It's not really a spoiler to say it because if you're not really into bizarro comedy movies, you may not really enjoy the movie all that much. And I will at least point out this. From my perspective, if this movie hadn't had the writing that it did, like if the script hadn't been as good as it is, and the acting hadn't been as good, if other things surrounding it weren't as good, then the bizarre jokes would have absolutely ruined the movie. Any lesser movie would have struggled to carry the weight of what the movie proposes as its emotional core and all the garbage nonsense that it also throws into the mix. It would have buckled under its weight and wouldn't have come out as good of a movie as it eventually was. But again, it didn't manage to lose its sort of heart. It never really felt like forced, or it didn't feel like those bizarre things to ended up ruining the movie, at least in my opinion, because there are some people I've talked to who tend to say that the bizarre elements definitely ruined it for them, or they didn't like the movie, and that's completely fine. You don't have to like everything that the current population is obsessed with. It's just worth noting that depending on your mileage, you may or may not get a lot more out of this movie than you bargained for, or that you wanted, or it'll be right up your alley and you'll really enjoy it. It's really difficult to tell because once I get into the actual elements of the plot and what it's specifically about, it becomes an automatic spoiler, and you kind of just have to watch and experience it on screen in some capacity to really get the full experience out of it. It's one of those movies that I really do care about not spoiling, and so I can't go too far into it, but I can at least say that if you're not into bizarre stuff, it may really not strike a chord with you, and that's fine. I also wanted to bring up one thing about it, which I've sort of hinted at, is that this movie won a lot of awards, which makes it even more acceptable for you to not like the movie if you think it's like overrated or it doesn't deserve the awards it got. A lot of people tend to have those opinions about a lot of movies, and that's not an abnormal thing to think. But it is worth mentioning that from my perspective, again, a lot of the things that it won the awards for were exactly why the movie worked. It wouldn't have worked without these elements, and it's just incredibly surprising to me that, weirdly for once, at least in my opinion, the Oscars managed to actually point out the things that a movie did right and awarded them accordingly for it. And so it's just going to be a quick little exercise of reading through it and then talking about what that element specifically does. Best Picture is kind of a crazy thing to think about, but it is kind of indicative of how much our culture has been changing, I guess. It doesn't feel like a movie that'd be nominated or win Best Picture, and yet it did, which people probably 10 years from now are going to go, wait, that movie won Best Picture? Okay, I'll give it a shot. So it's kind of it felt like it really did feel like a movie that wouldn't have won. And the fact that it kind of won in an almost landslide is the good kind of surprise. It's the kind of thing that you go, oh, that's really cool. That's interesting. It partially deserved it, according to some people's opinions. And so it's like, okay, cool. That one isn't exactly the example I was looking for. So let me go into the other elements that I think made this movie good, which is Best Directors, which is this movie was directed by Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. I don't know how to pronounce the other Daniel's last name, but they are known as the directing duo, the Daniels. And they made the music video for the song Turn Down for What. They also directed the movie Swiss Army Man. They've definitely gotten a lot more attention after this movie came out, and more specifically, they were the reason why the movie honestly worked. Their bizarro, crazy style really kind of added to the overall feel of it. It felt like it definitely felt almost like an auteur, which is basically like a director who has full control over what they're making and puts like a lot of their own self into the movies that they're making. It's a bit difficult to see that because it's made by two people at first, but at first it's difficult to see how it could possibly be an auteur outing when it's two different people, but it does feel very personal for these two. It feels like they really tried to make it something interesting, and it's very likely that the two of them work together very well, which is why they're referred to as a duo and why they worked on such a big project together. So I'm not gonna necessarily call them out for being like bad at doing their job. They definitely put a lot of effort into it, and because of that, this movie was elevated. They ended up awarding Michelle Yeoh with Best Actress for her performance in Everything Everywhere All at Once. That is fully deserved. She is a wonderful actress. She carries the movie, aside from the other actors involved, which we'll get into in a second. But her performance was heartbreaking, but also wonderfully inspiring. Like, there's so many good things to say about her acting performance, as if those two things aren't automatically intertwined. You get what I'm saying. The Best Supporting Actor and Actress awards also went to two people in this movie, which was Ki Hoi Kwan and Jamie Lee Curtis for actor and actress, respectively, as in Best Supporting Actor and Actress. And Ki Hoi Kwan, when he was in this movie, people on the internet kind of freaked out because he basically went sort of off the grid for a while. He was acting in movies before this movie was a big thing. I think he was either gone for like 10 or 20 years, which is a long time to be gone from the acting world. Like, he basically disappeared and then he resurfaced and was just in this movie. And people rediscovered, hey, this guy's a really good actor. Why did he stop making movies? How do we sign him on to stuff? And it's a really funny sort of situation where people were never expecting to see him again, and then he shows up in this movie that's like incredibly compelling, and they're like, hey, look at him. And I will say as well, as an actor, he's really good. Like, he's up there. I definitely appreciated every aspect of his performance in the movie as well. Alongside Michelle Yeoh, they were just such a ideal pairing for a movie like this. And then Jamie Lee Curtis is Best Supporting Actress. It's Jamie Lee Curtis. She's wonderful and has taken the world over by storm. What else can I possibly say about Jamie Lee Curtis that hasn't already been said? She's wonderful. And they also ended up winning Best Original Screenplay for the Daniels, who directed the movie. Again, if the screenplay hadn't worked, this movie wouldn't have worked. So because the screenplay worked, the movie definitely worked. The movie also won Best Film Editing. And that one, it's kind of a subtle thing, but I definitely agree. I think this movie, for the concepts it throws out and for the things it plays around with, it definitely would have struggled if it didn't have good editing. You really have to kind of edit the scenes together in a way that makes sense. You have to kind of keep the sequence going. And for those of you who know the movie and know exactly what I'm talking about, you can definitely agree with me. For those of you who've never seen it before, trust me, it makes a lot of sense once you watch it, because you're like, okay, they really had to maintain some sort of consistency so the audience doesn't get lost. And I've just now realized how crazy it would sound to explain all of this about the movie when people still think it's about a woman getting audited by the IRS. It's not actually just about that, but I can't give away too much more. Again, if all of these elements hadn't been there, all the awards that it ended up winning would not have been. The awards it won were not for nothing. They definitely highlighted the things that this movie did right in the overall context of a movie. I will at least say that I think there was another element that they didn't shout out as much, which is in the Best Supporting Actress role. I do think Jamie Lee Curtis deserved the award, but I feel like an honorable mention should have been given to the other female supporting character, which is Stephanie Hsu. She was also a very prevalent actor in the movie. She had a very prevalent role to the story, and I don't know how many people really shouted her out for it. If the movie hadn't had her, I think the movie would have had everything else, but maybe would have been missing that extra element needed to push it through to the edge. That's how confident I feel that she deserved a shout out. Like, without her, the movie would have just been like a 9.5 out of 10, when in reality, she's the one who's forcing it right over the edge to be that 10 out of 10. Like, she's the one really carrying it, aside from all the other fantastic actors in it. It's just a well grouped set of people came together to be in this movie and to create it and to write it and to edit it all down and make the music for it. Just all of the elements working together made this movie what it is. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It really is. For those of you who have in fact seen Everything Everywhere All at Once, please do text in and let me know what your opinions are now that I've talked extensively about it. Once I get a handle on what I'm actually going to say, because again, it's early in the morning, please let me know if you find it was underrated, which is very unlikely, or if you thought it was overrated. I'd really like to hear that perspective of what specifically you thought was overrated about the movie. And so please do text in your response to 509-963-2311. That's 509-963-2311. And we are going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about The Green Knight. So stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, and we are going to be talking about some more A24 movies after talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once. More specifically, we're going to be talking about the movie The Green Knight from 2021, available to watch now on Max. So when I wanted to talk about A24 movies, I figured I could watch a lot of the more popular ones, which is it's not okay. I was about to say it's saying a lot. It's not really. There are a lot of A24 movies that have gotten a lot more popular over the last couple of years, and they've even got a new movie out now called Civil War, which I do not have any interest in going to see. But the point is that A24 has been around for at least a little while, and they've definitely garnered a bit of a fan base around their movies, specifically the ones that they end up producing along with very talented directors such as the Daniels for Everything Everywhere All at Once. But I figured I might as well because it's a production company and they tend to make a lot of movies, unless they're a failed production company, it makes sense to kind of pick and choose which ones I actually want to talk about, because it's just unified under being produced by A24. It's not really ones that are directed by one specific person or one genre or one series. It's a lot less restrictive, and so I could kind of play around with it. And The Green Knight falls into the category of maybe not being the best known A24 movie, but definitely being a notable one, to me at least, and one that I'd kind of had my eye on for a little while here and there because of how the scores on it looked not all that great. And then I was like, well, maybe the movie's actually good. And I was like, okay, might as well give it a shot. What's the harm? Honestly, I could formulate my own opinions without looking at the number score. And when reading the overall plot summary for the thing, I thought it actually sounded pretty interesting. And so I was like, might as well give it a shot. And I will give it a shot in terms of explaining that plot summary that actually made me more inclined to watch the movie. For those of you who don't know, The Green Knight is about a royal living in sort of the King Arthurian times. And he basically accepts this challenge from this mystical green knight, almost a spirit of the forest, which is why he's green, because he's part tree. At any rate, the knight says, on Christmas Day, if you land a blow on me, if you manage to hit me with your sword, in 1 year's time, you will have to travel to the Green Chapel, and I shall return that exact same blow that you laid on me 1 year earlier. So right now, Are you going to hit me? Are you going to do it? Do it. You won't. You won't. So the royal ends up cutting off the knight's head. And now he basically has to deal with the consequence of you've cut off the Green Knight's head. In 1 year's time, next Christmas, you're going to have to go to the Green Chapel and he's going to cut your head off. It's only fair because you did it first. The big message of the story is oopsie daisies, don't cut off a magical knight's head. Oopsies. it like I said, the story's setup is a pretty cool one, but it's also kind of funny when you look at it from the perspective of oopsie daisies. So I'm just going to keep saying it because it's going to make me laugh and it's going to make me enjoy talking about this movie a lot more. So might as well. I specifically wanted to kind of create a pros and cons list for this movie. I don't do that all the time, but it definitely helps kind of organize my thoughts a little bit. And The Green Knight is a movie of pros and cons, and so it makes more sense to do it for this movie than a lot of the other ones that I talk about. So I think we should go down on the pros first, which is that it has Dev Patel in it. And I talked about this extensively on Wednesday. I love Dev Patel. He is such a good actor, and I saw him in his newest movie, Monkey Man, where he directed and acted in it and also was a co-writer for it. He's got the talent, you know? He's got talent. He's really got a lot of genuine talent, and he deserves praise for his role in The Green Knight. The cinematography for this movie feels artistic and also inspired. It doesn't feel kind of thrown off to the side. It feels like they're trying to say something with a lot of the shots. They're trying to show visual indications. They're really trying to establish things. It can definitely be studied, which is part of the reason why I ended up watching it, is because I saw it in one of those videos talking about how to make film, and it was like talking about specifically cinematography. And there was just a quick clip of The Green Knight in there, and I was like, that shot looks cool. I kind of want to give that movie a shot, which is what I tend to do with a lot of things. When I see a clip from a movie and they list the title there, I'm like, oh, I gotta mentally remember that one because that shot looks cool. And The Green Knight definitely delivers on just one cool shot and a whole lot more. So I can definitely give it a recommendation for that. Again, the story is a very cool concept. It is technically based on a very old legend of Sir Gawain. I don't even know how to properly pronounce it because I don't speak King Arthur talk, but it is a well-established story. But it does deserve props for recreating that story in film form, where a lot of people are more likely to kind of hear your story rather than in just a book or in an old poem. Not saying that a lot of people don't like the old poem or any books based around it, but it's like cinema is a lot more of a broader scope. Everybody's seen movies before, and by contrast, a lot of people sometimes don't end up carrying the habit of reading through all the way. So it's just kind of a fun little contrast there. I will also say, as a movie about, you basically already know how it's going to end. You know that it's essentially going to be about Sir Gawain, which is again played by Dev Patel. He's going to get his head chopped off by the Green Knight. You know that's what the story is kind of leading up to, and even though you know that, it's still got enough tension in it for you to think, okay, what if he doesn't get to the chapel on time? What if he doesn't manage to make it there? Is he going to turn back? Is he going to get lost along the way? Is he going to get robbed? Is that what's going to happen? Like it does keep the tension going, partially through its weirdly, it's got a weirdly good sense of horror in it, and as a straightforward sort of fantasy fable, I wasn't expecting it to be partly a psychological horror, but I wasn't super opposed to seeing that unfold on screen. It definitely has very tense moments, very interesting and sort of, I guess, built up moments that really feel difficult to watch at times. It's not like something that you kind of sit down and kind of go, oh, look at all the happy fantasy stuff. It's definitely part horror. That's where part of the classification comes from. And that is helped enormously by the presence of the Green Knight. The only time he doesn't feel menacing and like an extra figure who should be avoided is by the very end. But even then, as a character of himself, the Green Knight is horrifying. Just from what he represents, what he's basically come to do, and from his just overall screen presence and the way they film him and the way he talks and what he does, it stands out above a lot of the other elements working in the movie. And it kind of makes sense that they do that because it's called The Green Knight. When you name a movie after a character, you tend to make the movie that character a little more interesting. And if you don't, then the movie kind of suffers because of it. So glad to say that they definitely didn't fail. And The Green Knight is very, very intimidating. The music also manages to fit in within the movie. It's a bit different from what you'd probably expected going into it, but it definitely fits the overall style of the movie. So there's no real complaints about it. The pace of the movie is definitely maintained throughout the entire thing, even though it tends to cut between shots a lot. It's consistent, and so it doesn't feel super rushed, or it feels intentional. It feels intentionally fast. It feels intentionally kind of snap, snap, snap. And for that reason, it doesn't really warrant complaining about if they're doing it intentionally. And I can definitely tell that they're doing it intentionally. And because of that, the editing tends to work, again, intention. If they're going for that, then they definitely achieved it. And the biggest call out I can give this movie is that since it's kind of a fable, more of a fantasy story, they tend to have these little title cards that pop up and say like the beginning of the journey, or the interlude, or the continuation. Sir Gawain sets off and stuff like that, and they end up like changing the font every time a little title card shows up, and I really like that. It's such a minor thing to talk about me liking, but I do like that kind of thing. I do want to try to do that with my own kinds of movies, and so it's just fun to point it out. Of course, it does run into the issue of sometimes being unable, you can't necessarily read it perfectly, but c'est la vie, c'est la vie. To move on to the cons, speaking of c'est la vie, such as life, there are cons to this movie. And there are some kind of stronger ones. There's not as many cons as there are pros, but there are definitely some almost movie-breaking cons. One of the things that this movie is known for is having a 6.8 on IMDb. You should only look at the IMDb rating if you're insane and like to use rating sites to determine what your opinion on a movie is going to be. AKA me, because I do that all the time too. I'm calling myself out on this as well. I did not get any like definitive proof that the movie specifically deserved that 6.8, because there are nuances to this movie, specifically talking about its editing, its pacing, its story, and its acting to it that you would not get, and as well as its cinematography and the Green Knight as a character. Like, you would not get any of that from just a number rating of 6.8. You do not get that subtlety. You do not get that from reading a review. You get it from someone talking about it and wanting to mainly say what their opinions are of it. You don't get it from like a objective review, because there is no objective review. There's a subjective review. And in my opinion, that 6.8 does not need to be given as much weight as I originally gave it. I will at least admit, though, that probably part of the reason why it seemed to kind of fluctuate is that, in my opinion, a lot of the actors aren't as good as Patel. It's a kind of a funny contrast, because one of the actors, the one who specifically plays the king, is played by Joel Edgerton, and I know for a fact he's a good actor. I've seen him be a good actor before. So it's very weird to me that he didn't seem to nail the performance. I don't know exactly what was going on, but a lot of the other actors, aside from the Green Knight and Dev Patel as Sir Gawain, don't really do it for me. I think they just are kind of phoning it in and just kind of going off of, we are reading the lines for a character in the way that it's written down, or being told to read them in, and not really giving it any more than that. Which, when you're an actor, you want to kind of convey the feeling and the mood of the story. And they don't really do that. Dev Patel is the only one who really does that in full. And so it's like, okay, cool. I will also say that it's a little frustrating that Dev Patel, Gawain, does not learn anything at all. It's a bit of a spoiler, and it was done intentionally, but it's also really funny to me to watch that I managed to sit through a movie where a character does not grow or change by the end of it until the very last minute, essentially. And even then, it just feels really forced. Like he does not grow, learn, or change anything about him at all until the last minute. And it's like that's really fun to watch. That's really fun to see. I'm so glad for that. That's how you tell a story, everybody. Keep the character static. Don't have them change at all. And it does end up being a little frustrating. It kind of drags the movie down a little bit. Again, with all of its other elements, I think it definitely can kind of recover from it. But there is one final thing I want to say about The Green Knight that really frustrates me, and that is the ambiguity of the ending. Or what I should say is that they claim that the ending is, heavy quotes, ambiguous. Let me explain why that's in heavy quotes right now. This movie is about the Green Knight who is going to chop off his head. Because Sir Gawain chopped off the Green Knight's head. Now, of course, the Green Knight is magic, and he can pick up his head and put it back on and grow it back over time, over the course of a year, because that's how things work in King Arthur's tales. So we know the movie is about the Green Knight going to chop off his head. We know that's the setup of the story. And we get there to the end of the movie. This is a spoiler, but just follow me here. At the end of the movie, the Green Knight is about to chop off Gawain's head to get his payment back. And Gawain has to come to terms with the fact that he's going to lose his head. Again, like I said, he hasn't really changed or grown at all until this very moment where he has to kind of confront the reality of his situation. He could have turned back at any point in time. And they do kind of a fake out ending where it seems like he does actually turn back and run away and go back home and become the king and do a bunch of other stuff. But then the Green Knight eventually tracks him down and cuts off his head anyways. But then it cuts back to him just being on the ground about to get his head chopped off. And I keep bringing it up, but it is the significant driving force of the story. And he basically has to come to terms with it. And he goes, listen, just do it. I'm ready now. Let's do this. And the Green Knight goes, okay, now off with your head, right? Now, the filmmakers tend to claim that this is an ambiguous line because the Green Knight, kind of does the whole neck slicing thing where he drags his finger across Dev Patel's neck and he goes, no, off with your head, and he's all giddy about it. And it's like, that's supposed to be ambiguous, implying that either the Green Knight just lets him go and says, oh, you can walk off with your head attached to your body, or it means he's still going to chop off his head, and he's just saying, okay, now I'm going to cut off your head. It's apparently ambiguous which one it actually goes with. Let me explain something to you. If you set up a movie about a green mystical knight going to chop off a guy's head because the guy chopped off the Green Knight's head, right? And you end the movie with the line, off with your head, and you have him doing the little neck slicing motion, right? All of that. You cannot claim it's ambiguous. You can't do that because what else am I supposed to get from that? I had to read it and I was like, no, it's pretty clear cut. He's going to cut off his head. He has to. That's how the story was built up to that's what the story was built up to. That's what it was going for. You can't claim it's ambiguous. I do not care. It is not ambiguous, in my opinion. Fully and truly, it is not ambiguous. And the only excuse I can give for it is that in the Italian dub of the movie, they say specifically, and it translates to, now your head may go. If you want to claim ambiguousness, Claim it when you write the line like that. If you were to write the line like, now your head may go, that is so weird. It's such a weird way of putting it. It could mean multiple things. It could mean he's walking off with his head. Maybe it means that the Green Knight is going to make him, like, is going to cut off his head, and he's now going to get the magical power to just carry his own head around, and he maybe reattach it to himself, or it will just stay removed from his body for the entire rest of his life, right? Or it's just him getting his head chopped off, or him not getting it chopped off. If you want it to be ambiguous and open-ended, write the line like that. You can't say, off with your head, and claim that it's ambiguous. It's the biggest line in Alice in Wonderland. It means exactly what you think it means. You can't claim ambiguousness for something so clear-cut when you've been implying that from the story the entire time. It's weak. It's lame. It's chickening out, and I hate it when a movie chickens out. That is my biggest complaint with The Green Knight. It is not ambiguous. It is not. In the English dub specifically, it is not ambiguous. In the Italian dub, fine. I'll give you that. But in the version that a lot of the people listening to this show would have seen it in, it's not. So stop trying to pretend like it is. It frustrates me to no end. But I could go on and just say the same things over and over again. So we are going to take another break here on What to Watch Weekends. For those of you who have or haven't seen The Green Knight, please text in your opinions if you think it's underrated, overrated, or if you do think it's really ambiguous. If you really think it does deserve that title, please do let me know why you think that. Please text in to 509-963-2311. That's 509-963-2311. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. My name is Nathan. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. For our third movie that we're going to be talking about this morning, we are going to be taking a look at the movie The Lighthouse from 2019, available to watch now on Max. So, since the consistent theme this morning has been weird movies made by A24, it only makes sense to talk about The Lighthouse. It's definitely up there with a lot of the other ones. This movie is about a lighthouse. Shocking, I know. It's called The Lighthouse, and it's set on a lighthouse. That titles really matter when you're making a movie, honestly, though. But it's about two lighthouse keepers, played by Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, who end up being put on this lighthouse island, and then they end up going insane. It's a very good movie to watch late at night when you're trying to go to sleep and you really would just want to watch something that makes you feel really good about humanity and isn't disturbing or horrifying in any way at all. It'll give you a really good night's sleep and you won't be confused and horrified the entire time. I sure wasn't when I watched it at like 10 at night. I was definitely not like sitting awake in absolute terror the entire time. I'm incredibly joking. I very much do not recommend watching this movie late at night. But I make horrible decisions, and I did exactly that. So I guess I learned my mistakes. But I will talk about the movie itself, and the biggest thing that it deserves praise for is Robert Pattinson specifically. For those of you who don't know, Robert Pattinson was the main, he was Edward Cullen in the Twilight series, which is not a good series of movies. I've seen reviews, I've seen clips, and it just causes pain every time I look at it. It just doesn't feel like a good series of movies to watch. It's a lot more fun to watch people ridicule them than it would be to actually sit down and watch them and scream at the screen the entire time. For me, at least, my voice would go out. But it was well known for having Robert Pattinson in it, and for him not being good in the role. The role was just not well written. He didn't do a very good job acting, and on the one hand, at first, people tended to think that he just wasn't a good actor. And then over the years that followed after Twilight, people stopped and went, hey, he's been in a lot of other movies, right? Okay, let's watch them. Oh, wait, they're actually pretty good. And he's pretty good himself. He's actually a half-decent actor. What's going on here? I thought he wasn't good. the thing about Twilight is that Robert Pattinson hated being in the movies. He just did not like being the character at all. He rarely ever talks about it in a good light. Anything else he's been in, he's just like, no, this was so much more. This was fun. I really liked doing it. But Twilight, he's just like, nah, that sucked, guys. Come on. It was awful. And The Lighthouse is specifically one of those movies that he talks about. And he's like, oh, no, it was great. I really had fun doing it. I really felt alive as an actor. And when you watch him in a movie like The Lighthouse, you go, oh, I see why. Because he's a legitimately good actor. And legitimately good actors tend to have fun with the roles because they tend to take over that role and kind of they inject the personality into it. You can have a very well written character and a very well planned out character with a good backstory and a good sense of what's going on in his current story or her current story. And the actor just doesn't know how to convey that at all. They don't know how to match up with the voice that should be used for it. They may not know how to actually specifically conduct themselves physically, as in like their facial expressions, their overall demeanor, their body language, anything at all. And some people just don't know how to do it. Robert Pattinson is absolutely one of those people who knows how to do all of that exactly. He does it perfectly and in a way that makes sense for any character he portrays that I've seen him in. Specifically, when he was in The Batman from 2022. He is the best Batman on screen I think I've ever seen, hands down. He's not the best Bruce Wayne, but as the Batman, specifically the Batman persona, he killed it. And he'd killed his performance in The Lighthouse as well, as a crazy lighthouse keeper, the younger one out of the two of them, with Willem Dafoe being the older one. This younger one ends up getting driven further and further insane, having to constantly meet the needs of the older one, who's technically his boss while they're on this lighthouse island. And it just builds and builds and builds until the very end when he just goes full psycho. And it's awesome to see. Only a good actor can go full psycho. Look at Anthony Hopkins. I rest my case. He managed it perfectly, and so did Rob Pattinson. I will also say that the movie has Willem Dafoe in it. And I could go on another big rant about Willem Dafoe, but I don't want to, because Willem Dafoe is Willem Dafoe. Everybody loves him. Everybody knows him as being Green Goblin from Spider-Man. I've seen Spider-Man. I loved Green Goblin, and I loved Willem Dafoe in The Lighthouse. He doesn't deserve he deserves all the praise he gets, but I don't think he deserves any more praise because he gets a lot of it. What I'm trying to say is there's no more praise that I could offer him that hasn't already been given to him directly. So I'll just leave it at that. Although I will say he does get the reputation for being good at playing crazy characters for a reason, and Lighthouse is no exception. One thing I kind of failed to mention on Wednesday when reviewing this movie is that it's shot all in black and white. It's set in 1890. It's very much before the invention of movie cameras, so they specifically went in and they filmed it on black and white, almost in a completely square format, in a way that looks very old-timey. And they did use old cameras to do it. And for that reason, it's definitely got a style to it. It's got a feel to the way it looks and how it sort of feels when you're watching it, that I just kind of skipped completely over. But it is part of the movie's DNA. It also contributes nicely to the cinematography of the movie because when a movie is in black and white, it just makes it stand out. It feels more visually expressive. And when you have a good cinematographer who knows how to position the camera in ways that kind of feel vindicative of the story or like express the story clearly enough, it kind of meshes together into something beautiful. And that's exactly what happened with this movie. And the best way I can describe it is they got a lot of mileage out of their style. They also got a lot of mileage out of how weird this movie is. I have mentioned it a little bit, but I personally think this movie doesn't defy genre. It's a very clear psychological horror. That doesn't mean it's a straightforward story or one that gets to the point immediately. It's a very slow burn, and it takes a while to get to the horrific parts. But when it gets there, it stays there, and oh boy, I severely regret watching it late at night. Do I ever after seeing some of these scenes? One of the biggest points is like it also feels like horrifying because of how unexpected some of it is. Like the most unexpected scene in this movie is one where Robert Pattinson brutally murders a seagull. Don't worry, animals weren't actually harmed in the making of the movie. They didn't actually do anything bad. But it's like he straight up just murders a seagull, and we have to watch it, and that somehow is part of the horrifying consequences of his actions because he murdered a seagull, and now the supernatural is going to get involved, and it's going to get a whole lot weirder. Okay, sure, I guess. Yeah, maybe. No, I don't get it. I don't get it. Help me. No. Um, I I I will at least say that at the very least, for its horrifying aspects, you're definitely gonna just stay awake the entire time, especially when you're watching it late at night. But it's definitely a movie that keeps you in the moment, which is impressive again considering its style because it's black and white square ratio, and it's set in 1890. So and they're also at a lighthouse, and they're kind of sailor types. They speak in this old English sailor accent that makes half of the movie impossible to understand. It's all filmed in black and white, and it's kind of square. How did this movie exist in 2019 of all things? It's crazy to think that there are still people willing to get callbacks to the olden days in the current film industry. And more surprisingly is that there's an audience for this kind of thing in the current day. I know 2019 was 5 years ago, so it's definitely not as current as it is now. But 2019 still feels late enough into the 21st century for me to say, okay, why on earth was this as successful as it is? I get why. It's because it has Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe in it. But at the same time, some people very likely may have not been able to kind of stomach a movie like this, even with Willem Dafoe in it. They would have been like, oh no, this doesn't really seem up my alley. And yet it totally is. People love this movie, which they should, but it just kind of baffles me that the movie was as successful as it was, that it was successful in the first place. But I'm very happy for it. Again, it's not being confused is not always a bad thing. It's just worth noting that I was confused as to how it got popular. I was also confused while watching it. So, and I'm still definitely saying it's a good movie that's worth watching. So again, confusion's not always a bad thing. And the biggest praise I can absolutely give this movie is its sound design. Sound design is something I do not talk about when it comes to a movie for a very specific reason, and that is sound design is like lighting when making a movie. If it's good, you're not supposed to notice it. So you may be thinking, okay, what do you mean it's good? If you notice it, then doesn't that mean it's bad? No. What I mean is that it pushes its way through the basic sort of idea of sound design, which is to be in the background, but also to enhance the story. The sounds are important. A sound can carry a movie when the visuals can't. And for whatever reason, a movie because the movie already has a very strong visual style, they decided for some reason to make the sound go even further than the visuals, so that even if the visuals failed, which they don't, the sound would be able to carry it. That's crazy to me, but I'm not complaining because they basically throw in this very haunting foghorn. Because they're on a lighthouse island, there's a little foghorn that keeps blaring, and it sounds so partially distorted and so loud and so weird for a foghorn of all things that it sticks out in your mind. And you'll be hearing it if you watch it late at night and you're going to try to go to bed after it. You'll just be hearing this noise. I don't know if that came through on the microphone, but it's a very deep blaring sound that just kind of gets to you. It feels very dense and very thick, which is a very weird way to describe a sound, but it also fits if you've heard the sound before. It stood out to me. It really did. It's kind of adds to the haunting atmosphere that the movie already sets up with its visuals, and that's impressive to me. It's straight up some of the best sound design I think I've heard in a movie, and that's just one sound. Trust me, the rest of it, I could go on for hours about the rest of the sounds in this movie, but we don't have hours. We've only got one movie left, and I'm very tired, so we might as well just leave it off there. I would highly recommend watching The Lighthouse if you have good mileage on psychological horror movies. If you don't watch it. I wouldn't fully recommend it. And again, it's not ambiguous. Ambiguity should not be celebrated in movies. Make it, unless it's Inception. That's the only exception I'm willing to give. But if a movie specifically sets out to do a thing, you can't necessarily claim that it's fully ambiguous. And I think The Lighthouse escapes falling into that pitfall, unlike The Green Knight. But I also think it's definitely got more psychological horror elements to it. And so for that reason, if you're not up for that, I wouldn't recommend the movie. So for those of you who have seen The Lighthouse, and if you think it's underrated or overrated, or if you really like Willem Dafoe, or you really hate Robert Pattinson for some reason because you're crazy, or it's just because you've only seen him in Twilight before, please let me know by texting 509-963-2311. That's 509-963-2311. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. My name is Nathan. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. For our last movie this morning, we have been talking about A24 movies, specifically Everything Everywhere All at Once. We've talked about The Green Knight, and we've talked about The Lighthouse. I'd like to close out this morning by talking about a movie that I didn't really know was a movie until I looked it up and I found out about it. And I kind of just found it sort of floating through the ether, but it was definitely produced by A24, or funded by A24. And that is the movie called Free Fire from 2016, available to watch on Max. Yes, Free Fire. That sounds kind of like a basic title. It might be a basic movie. It is, but in a good way. Let me get into it. Free Fire is about two gangs who basically meet up in a warehouse to enact a black market arms sale. They're basically going to be exchanging guns for money. And then somebody messes up, and one member of one gang shoots a member of the other gang, and then it turns into an entire Free Fire ordeal. Hey, that's the title of the movie. It turns into one very long shootout, just a very long one. And I know I've said it's a very long one. Let me paint a picture for how exactly long this is. I don't mean that it's like, oh, there's like 30 minutes of a shootout. I mean that the first 30 minutes are about setting up the characters, setting up the location, setting up the story, and what's going to cause the shootout, which is the first 30 minutes of the movie. About 30 minutes. I'd say it might be closer to 25 or something like that. And then after the first shot is fired, it only takes about 3 to 5 minutes before the next shot is fired. And then the next, and then the next, and then it snowballs further and further. And so essentially, once that first shot is fired, it turns into the big shootout scene for the next 55 minutes or so. And then the last 5 minutes are the resolution of the story. So keep this in mind. The movie is about an hour and a half long. That means from about the 25-minute mark to the 30-minute mark, it's a very tense sort of setup for a crime movie. Then the next almost hour is just a shootout. And then the last 5 minutes are the closing of it. It is ridiculously long. And it's also very intense. And it's very loud and possibly partly obnoxious. But it's also very straightforward. It doesn't really give you a lot of room to explore the characters or the depths of their souls or their, like, what they think about philosophy. which weirdly enough is such a good thing when you're looking for it, when you're looking for a straightforward movie that gets right to the point and doesn't mess around. You want a straightforward movie that is just a shootout. Maybe not exactly that, but what I'm trying to say is that its straightforwardness really actually adds to what it's trying to go for, which is just a straight up genre film. It's just trying to be an action crime movie. Nothing more, nothing less. And a full-on shootout is definitely not less than a straightforward crime movie. It just won't be anything more than it won't include something more like the morality of killing the other people that you're trying to have a deal with. It's just one minor misunderstanding that causes everything to go awry. And that's beautiful. Not really. It's not beautiful. It's more simple. It's to the point. It does its job. And I can fully commend it for that. It's also really funny because this movie has Cillian Murphy in it, which I was not expecting at all. I was like, what do you mean? Oppenheimer, the guy who played Oppenheimer in 2022 is in this movie? Yes, he is. And his role's actually well established. Like, he's a major player in this entire thing. He doesn't just show up and then leave. It also has Brie Larson and Charlotte Copley in it. They're both great as well. There are some at least halfway decent big names attached to this movie, and they play it straight. They go for it. And it's just kind of fun to watch them all interact in one space. It's all set in this warehouse. It rarely ever leaves the warehouse. And for that reason, it just adds to the straightforward nature of it. If it was set in the streets or in the city or in like an office building, well, an office building would have been better. Well, not better. It would have been the same idea. The point is, having it be in an enclosed space that doesn't have a lot of groundwork means that you can set up the sort of location of the movie very quickly and to the point and explore every facet of that location without having to worry about different locations, different places. Just set it in one place, go for it. And that just makes it all the more better of how straightforward it is. You can't just keep it simple, stupid. The KISS method, which is keep it simple, stupid, is very much something that I appreciate when it comes to movies. If you're gonna make a movie, sometimes you want something deep, something expressive, something highly artful, and sometimes you want something simple and easy to watch that is more of a popcorn flick. Free Fire is definitely a popcorn flick, and I could only imagine just watching it in the theaters and just being like, wow, this is what I'm gonna be watching for the next 55 minutes? Okay, that's fine. It's loud and it's in my face. But I've got a bunch of popcorn and I've got a Coke. Might as well sit here and watch it. I will say that it could almost be seen as a bad thing, and it's almost is a bad thing of how straightforward it is, because there is no deeper exploration of personal meaning or any sort of like point of view that's kind of prevalent. There are a lot of conflicting points of view, which is why this movie works as a crime action movie. But it doesn't have a main character. There's no specific person who's really carrying the story, because the two who end up causing the gunfight are both the henchmen of the main gangsters. And they're both really stupid and annoying. And if they were going to be the main character, they should have made them more likable, or at least relatable, or something else other than being practically children who get into a dumb argument and then shoot each other. Which, that's a great way of explaining it. It's basically just like watching a bunch of children fight, at least for the first little bit of it, and then it turns into some more gruesome elements. But again, it still keeps up that it's just a shootout. It's just one long action scene. And because of that, there is no driving force. It's from everybody's perspective. And I will at least give it this. It could have failed if it didn't keep in mind that sometimes when you're writing a story to a movie, you have a central idea or a central situation, a central event that you want to keep in mind. And when you write a movie like that, you tend to have multiple characters or at least a couple characters who have a different opinion on the situation or on what's happening, on the event of the story. And to Free Fire's credit, every character seems to have a different approach to this gunfight. Some of them are just sitting there going, I don't care. One of them starts smoking the instant it starts. One of them is trying to get the money from the deal. One of them is just trying to get out of there. One of them is trying to save a girl and keep her out of it. One of them is trying to save a guy who got shot in the head. Like it definitely plays around with the idea of everyone has a different viewpoint on what's happening and a different approach and a different strategy, and they're on different sides, and they may not know whose side they're on, or they may mess up and accidentally hit someone who's on their side. It just turns into a very massive conflict because of that. It wouldn't make sense for them to just be shooting at each other randomly. They have to have different approaches and different sort of strategies and different feelings associated with this conflict for it to work. And to its credit, they definitely pull that off. So in my opinion, I do think Free Fire is worth a watch for that alone. It's simple, it's stripped back, it's to the point, but it doesn't feel like just one long action scene for the sake of an action scene. They definitely at least give it the setup and put in the work to make it have a meaning that's just not personal or emotional. It's really just, it's more of a, you're on their side, we're going to shoot. And it is a little emotional, but it's also not like, they're not going to figure out the meaning of their lives from this, but they're definitely going to figure out whose side they're on and what they really believe in. Do they believe in money over their own life, or do they believe in maintaining their own life over other people's, or do they maintain saving other people? It's no deep meaning because it's a bunch of criminals shooting at each other at the end of the day, but at least there is something there to carry it forward. So good on them for that. And with that being said, that is all I have for What to Watch Weekends. Thank you for tuning in. I will be back here on 88.1 The Burg next Wednesday at 8 to 9 p.m. I will be here on What to Watch Weekends next Saturday at 9 a.m. Follow What to Watch Wednesdays at What to Watch Wednesdays on Instagram. All one word, no caps, no spaces. And thank you all for listening, honestly. I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye-bye.